All right, brothers. Sorry for the confusion on the link, and thank you for uh, being diligent to join. I thought this morning what I'd like to do is maybe just go through one more example with us from several verses from Second Timothy and just diagram them together. So I wanted to pick a passage from chapter 4 this time for us to go through together, uh, and then of course, yeah, if there's any questions that you have or anything as we're going along, just feel free to stop me. But um, I think it's always good to keep working at the diagramming together. That's how we learn, because we always encounter something a little different with each passage, it seems. And so I think it's helpful to do that. So as long as you have your Kleenex box next to you for the nosebleed, let's get started. As I mentioned, I wanted to do another passage from Second Timothy, this time from chapter 4. Again, this will be, you can use this for your assignment, just a few verses, but at least this is part of the assignment that I gave you guys to diagram the book, the whole letter of Second Timothy. You know the steps for this. The first identify the first independent clause that you see. It's usually at the beginning. Then identify the rest of the phrases and clauses by looking for the connector words. And of course, you know the list. These are the most common ones, as we've discussed before. And then the hardest step 3, is, of course, identifying what that phrase or clause modifies and how it modifies it. That's the most challenging one. Once we've done that, then we're ready to make the actual diagram by putting those phrases and clauses under the word that they modify. So with that, let's jump right to 2 Timothy 4, verses 5 to 8. I'll ask Joshua if you could go ahead and read this passage. And as he's reading, just see if you guys can find the first independent clause that you see in the paragraph. So Joshua, why don't you go ahead, if you don't mind?
But you be sober in all things, endure hardship, do the work of an evangelist, fulfill your ministry, for I am already being poured out as a drink offering, and the time of my departure has come. I have fought the good fight, I have finished the course, I have kept the faith. In the future there is laid up for me crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, will award to me on that day, and not only to me, but also to all who have loved his appearing.
Great, thank you. Okay, since you read the passage, Joshua, I'm going to ask you, do you see the first independent clause in this passage? What do you think might be the first one?
Be sober in all things.
Yeah, I think that's it. Or be sober, really. Right, that's the subject, you be sober. The verbs, be sober. Yeah, now, I can see right away, there looks like basically that first verse starts with 4 parallel commands there. You guys see that?
Yes.
Yeah. So if you see other clauses that you know are independent, you can obviously include those, but sometimes it's harder to tell what's independent and what is not. So I say just look for the first one, but if you do see any additional ones, go for it. And here it looks to me like pretty straightforward. There's a list of 4 commands that Paul's giving here. Okay. All right. Very good. Now, let me go back up to, or go to Charlie here. And let's now identify the rest of the phrases and clauses in the passage. So Charlie, I want to start with you. Verse 5, and ask you, do you see any connector words in verse 5?
In, but.
Okay, in and of. Yeah, those are both prepositions.
The first word.
Oh, but, sorry, yes, but. All right, any others?
Uh,
In verse 5.
as. No, in verse 5.
Yeah, verse 5. Yeah, I think
I
that's
think
it.
that's all.
Yeah, okay, so you want to jump to verse 6?
As.
As, okay,
As.
good, that's, seems to be functioning like preposition here. Any others in verse 6?
And.
And,
And.
yeah. What kind of conjunction is that, by the way?
Uh,
How about the
Coordinate,
four?
coordinating or subordinating?
Coordinating.
coordinating.
Yes, okay, good. All right, any other
Of.
connector words? Of
For. The
and
first word
for.
in chapter.
First one.
Yeah.
Now, is that for? It is a connector word. Do you think it is a conjunction here, or is it a preposition?
Uh, conjunction.
Conjunction.
Yeah, it is a conjunction. How do you know that it's a conjunction?
Because it
It gives
connects uh with a verb.
Yeah, what follows it is a verb, right? I am being poured out. Right? That's a clause. Sorry. It's followed by a clause. Now, if it was just
Okay.
followed by a noun, it would be a preposition. But it's followed by a clause, and so we know that it's functioning here as a conjunction. All right, good. This is that's all the ones I see. All right, good job. Narelle, time time for your torture. All right.
Yeah.
Can you do
Verse
verse
7.
can you do verse 7? What are the connector words in verse 7?
Uh, none?
None. That's
None?
right. Aha. I thought I'd trick you. Oh, very good.
Yeah.
Good job. There's none in verse 7. There are some
Yeah.
commas there. Now, those aren't connector words, but they are helpful clues as to separating separators. So
Yes.
we'll note that in a minute here. Okay, verse 8 then, Narelle. Are there any connector words in verse 8?
In.
All right. Yes, preposition.
For.
Laid up for me. Now, in this case, is it a preposition or a conjunction?
Preposition.
Yeah, notice what follows it. For me.
Me. Oh, yeah.
Okay, so very good. Any other connector words?
Of.
Yes, of, another preposition.
Uh, to.
Award to me, this one?
Oh, no, no. An. And.
Okay, so award to is a preposition. On, and then you said and.
Yeah.
Okay, good.
two.
To.
Two, another two.
But.
But that is another conjunction. Good. There's a lot here, huh? Any
To.
more?
To.
Two again.
Is. To Tim.
Uh, where are you at? What word?
Verse 8.
Okay, verse 8, but where, what word? I didn't hear the word.
Who?
Who? Okay, yeah.
Oh.
Who?
Wait.
What is that called?
Relative pronoun.
Yeah, relative pronoun.
Relative
And
pronoun.
there's
Which?
one more. Which?
Yeah.
Okay, another relative pronoun. Very good. I think that's all of them.
How about also?
Also, where is it? Where are we looking?
After the but.
Oh, here. Yeah, also is technically an adverb, so it's modifying in this case to uh um it's connecting To me, to
Two words.
me, and to all. So it's not a connector word in this case. It's modifier. I usually just include it in the phrase or clause just for the sake of being simple.
Pastor Tim,
Yes. So it actually
Um,
technically goes with but here. Technically. Yeah, Kent?
verse 7 cannot be it can be an independent clause. I have fought the good fight.
Yeah, I have fought the good fight. Yes,
I have
that is a
finished the
clause,
course.
and
I
it
have
looks
finished the
like it
course.
might be independent. Yes. But let's work through the paragraph and then see when we get to it. But yeah, these three all look like potentially independent clauses, right? It's another list. Okay, very good. Any other questions or comments before we get to the next step? All right. Now the fun step. Let's see. Now the fun step, right? Where we figure out what each phrase or clause modified. So let's break out each of the connector words. Now, what I'm going to do here, notice we have these commas, and sometimes the punctuation can help us. And in this case, I think it does. This should be separated. Endure hardship, do the work. Now, why do you think I separated that clause here? There's the comma, but remember, punctuation is just an interpretation of the translation. It's not in the original language. But is there another reason that it makes sense to separate endure hardship as a separate phrase or clause? Anybody have a thought about that?
They are in the same list.
Yeah, they're part of a
Those are
list.
independent clause.
Yeah, and notice, as we said before, it's an independent clause. It's another command. We have be sober, and then we have endure hardship, right? The subject is still you here. The verb is endure, and there's an object here, hardship. All right, that's a clause. It's independent. So it would not go with in all things. It's not in all things endure hardship as one single phrase or clause, right? Endure hardship would be a separate clause, right? And this, so the comma there makes sense that it should be separated. All right, and the same, do the work, and then of an evangelist, and then the same thing. We hit another comma, and I think makes sense to divide it there because this is another clause. Fulfill your ministry. Okay, then we have for. So we'll separate there as and of time of my departure has come. We're going to talk about this because has come is a little fishy there. Let's see. Let me highlight. I'll leave it alone. Okay. Now we have a period here because this all should not be on the same. It's not one phrase or clause here. Clearly, I have fought the good fight is another clause. And again, we're back to that list again. We have the commas. You see that? So I would separate it at the commas because it looks like these are three separate clauses. They're not all part of the same phrase or clause. So whenever you see a comma, it's okay to assume it's separate and divide it out. It's okay to do that. Just follow the translator, but then look and be able to say why it makes sense that it's separate. Okay. And we have a period here, so it's ending a sentence. In the future, there's laid up for me the crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge. Now you could divide it here if you wanted. There's the commas there. I guess we can do that. will award to me, to, on, and, to, but, to, and then who. All right. With me
Pastor
so
Tim.
far?
Yes.
Pastor
Yeah,
Tim,
Pastor
how
Tim.
about the comma after but you in verse 1?
But you, oh,
Verse
here.
1.
Okay, there is
Verse
a
five.
comma. All right, now we could do that if you just say, but then what you want to do is, as you look at be sober, what is the subject of be sober?
You.
You, right?
Two.
So the subject is you. Well, that's exactly what is here. But you be sober. So I put it on the same line, even though it's repeating, but you be sober. Because the you here in the first line is the subject of the command.
Ah,
And he's just repeating it for emphasis, right?
It normal to the translation, Pastor Tim. If there's one command, if he put if there's more than one command, he put comma on the subject.
No, it's that he's repeating the subject. It's technically this. A more, a little translation would be, but you. So he put the pronoun you, and then he puts the command be sober. He doesn't need to put the pronoun here, technically, right? Because the pronoun or the subject is part of the command. It's an English command. In English, an imperative assumes you is the subject, right?
Okay.
But Paul here adds the pronoun. Oops. Paul adds the pronoun you because there's emphasis here. So technically it should be you, but you be sober. So there's emphasis. He's just talked about, what was it? In the earlier verses here, 2 Timothy 4. He's just talked about the people are going to accumulate for themselves teachers, right? To tickle their ears. And they'll turn away. That's what he said just before. But he's saying, but you, Timothy. So he's being emphatic here by adding a pronoun that's not needed. So Paul's doing that on purpose. Because the subject you is just understood as part of the verb, since it's a command. Does that make sense? You guys follow me?
Yes.
Okay. So with that, so yeah, the comma here is just because he's actually repeating the subject. You be sober. So normally in English you'd put a comma there because of he's repeating that sub you, comma, you be sober.
So then I also have a question in verse 8.
Yeah.
The in the future, is it a prepositional phrase
Yes.
that could also modify the rest laid up? So
Yes.
we could separate in the future and the rest laid up.
Good observation, Jesse. I left it there to see if you guys could notice that. Do you guys understand what he's saying? Here in verse 8, there's in the future, and then there is laid up. So what is that part of one phrase or clause, or should it be separate? I would say it should be separate. They reverse the order. Normally you would say there is laid up in the future, or me the crown, but he put that in the future at the beginning, maybe for emphasis or maybe to make it clear. So yeah, there should be, there is laid up is a clause that's not part of in the future. In the future is a separate phrase. So even though there's no comma, it's just because normally you would say there's laid up for me in the future. Or there is laid up for me the crown in the future. But he put in the future at the beginning of the sentence. There's also something else here that's a little bit, you should notice that doesn't fit. Does anything about this look odd? For me, the crown. Should that all be part of one phrase there, you think?
Yes, there's laid up for me the crown.
There's laid up for me. What is laid up for me?
The crown.
The crown. So the crown here is actually, this is the object of laid up. What is laid up? The crown.
Hmm. So it can be one. There is laid up for me. It can be one. Sir Tim, it will not brought down, bring down
Well,
the.
for me is a prepositional phrase. So for is a connector word. So I would put it here. But this is one of those examples that we've seen before where sometimes a prepositional phrase or a phrase or clause gets inserted between or within another clause. Sometimes it goes in between the subject and verb. Sometimes it's inserted between the verb and the object, like here. So technically, the sentence is this. There is laid up the crown, right? Subject is there in this case. The verb is laid up. And then the object is the crown. You guys see that? But in this case, they put the crown, they put for me in between the verb and the object. Why do they do that? Well, think about this.
Yes.
Oftentimes, so let's ignore in the future for a minute. All right, that's just an extra phrase. Here's the main, there is laid up the crown, right? That is the full subject verb object here of the clause, right? Now, if we put there is laid up the crown for me, it could modify, if we put for me at the end, then it could modify crown. Which crown? The for me crown. So it would just be describing the crown. But if we put for me where Paul put it, there is laid up for me the crown. Now, what do you think it modifies? You see, normally we'll check the word right before it. So here, I think for me is modifying now. There is laid up for me. It's telling the purpose. It's not describing the crown. It's describing the purpose that is laid up. It's laid up for me.
Yes.
All right. Here it would just modify crown. Which crown? The crown for me, that crown. But if we move this prepositional phrase to right after the verb is laid up, then that's telling it's likely modifying the verb. It's telling us something about the action, the purpose of the action. God's giving this for me. All right, now that may seem a subtle difference, but it does bring emphasis to the purpose for the action, not describing the crown. If for me is at the end, then it could go to laid up, but also it could go to crown. And again, remember the general rule for trying to find what the phrase modifies is to look at the word right before. And if that makes sense, then that's where it goes. All right. That's probably correct 80% of the time. It could go to another word or phrase earlier, but usually look to the word right before it and see if that makes sense. If it does, then that's probably what it's modifying. And so that's why often you will see, I think there's another place in this passage where we see this. I thought there was. Yes, there's another place where we see this happening in verse 6. Does anybody see that? Where we have a phrase inserted between or within the clause. You guys see it here in verse 6?
I am already as a drink offering being poured out.
Okay, so, well, here I is the subject, right? The verb actually is another compound verb. It's am being poured out. Okay? That's the verb. So I don't think it's happening there. Look down below here. Look at this one. The time of my departure has come. Of my departure has come. Does that go together? Is my departure the subject? Because this is a verb, obviously, has come. Notice here that we have a phrase inserted between a subject and a verb. The sentence, the clause is this: the time has come. Okay? The subject is time and the verb is has come. But notice we have of my departure inserted there. So this is the sentence: the time of my departure has come. The problem is we've got this phrase inserted between the subject and the verb. You guys see that? So that's the same thing here. So why does he do that? Because of my departure modifies time. Which time? The time of my departure has come. So he wanted to put of my departure right after time to make sure we understand that. The other way he could have put it is the time has come of my departure. Okay, that makes less sense if he puts that phrase after the clause. But by putting this phrase, inserting it between the subject, time, and the verb has come, he's doing that to make sure we understand that the of my departure is describing time, the word right before it. Okay? So, has come needs to be on a separate line because it's completing, it's the verb for the subject, time. Any questions on that? So we see here in this passage, just in these 4 verses, we see 2 examples of this situation where a clause is broken up by another phrase that's stuck in between it. And it's done on purpose. Again, to show the emphasis. And we can see that here in the Greek text itself. Let me show you. It's always good to go to Bible Hub, kind of confirm what we're seeing here. So let's do that. Let me show. I'll show you guys here. Okay. Hopefully you can see that on your screens. So let's go to, where are we? 2 Timothy. Okay. Chapter 4. And interlin, right? And then whole chapter. All right. Actually, let me move it over here. Easier. Can you guys still see it okay on your screen? Somebody give me a thumbs up or
Yes, Mr.
smile.
Tim.
Okay,
Yes,
thanks.
Pastor
Yes,
Tim.
yes, Mr. Tim.
All right, let's do this. Okay, so let's get down, where were we? Verse 5. So let's check this. The time, okay, here we are, if you can see it here. It's not helping. Okay, the time, there it is, of the departure. Notice the prepositional phrase is between the subject time and the verb is come. So that does reflect what Paul actually said, how he worded it in the text. So Paul actually did this. He inserted that prepositional phrase in order to make clear that he's modifying time. Which time? The time of my departure, that time. And then what was the other one? Was it verse 8? Yeah, it's verse 8. Okay, he says, which will award to me. Oh, I missed it. Oh, here it is. Sorry. There, from now on, is laid up for me the crown. Now, notice here, actually, something does pop out. That's a little different than what we understood before. Notice here, actually, is laid up for me the crown tells us the crown here is actually the subject, not the object.
Yes.
Okay, because this first word, from now on, or now, now is laid up for me the crown of righteousness, the of righteousness crown, literally what it says, which means the crown is the subject, but it's just put at the end of the sentence. So that's something helpful to take. We'll take note of that in our.
Yes.
Okay.
Ito.
Let's
Yes.
go back to our notes here. So we need to change this. The subject actually is the crown. There
Oh.
is no object here. Okay? You follow that?
Yes.
So it helps to look at the, so the word there isn't really there. It's really a time term, now, something like that, actually.
Well, yes, stayed up.
What's that, Jess?
In the Greek, Pastor Tim, it reads, the crown is laid up.
Yes. So basically now, or at this point,
Now.
the
Yes.
crown is laid up.
Yeah.
Now we really need Greek work
Well,
of
but
working knowledge.
hopefully you can see that though. Again, I was hoping you could notice that just from the interlinear here. Yes, Greek, knowing Greek would be really what we need. You know, so you guys should maybe think about that in the future. if you want to continue to grow in your understanding and studying the word, maybe start learning Greek. At some point, we're hoping in the Taya will be able to offer some Greek classes because
Yes.
we're working toward a master's program. So when we do, we'll have Greek, but I'm not sure how soon that's going to be. But you're going to need a break anyway from the preaching class, right? So you're not going to take Greek right away because the preaching classes, you need some rest. So, but
To recover.
but notice here again, if you carefully look at the interlinear, you'll notice here that first word, this word here, lepan, really has this idea of a time from now on, or now, or at this point, something like that. So that's not a subject. It's not a noun. Okay. So
Yes.
hopefully, that's not obvious. Maybe it's a little subtle, but hopefully if you're looking carefully at the interlinear, you would notice that. Okay, you may not catch it. Honestly, I didn't catch it the first time I did this. So I missed it as well. So I'm going to modify my diagram a little bit to correct for this. And that's the thing, guys.
So,
Yeah, go
Pastor
ahead.
Tim, using as we use interlinear, it's good to observe the noun and then the verb and also the object, Pastor Tim,
Yeah, what I typically will
to
do,
arrange
yes, what I suggest you do is just diagram a few verses, and then you can look at another English translation just to see, because sometimes that might pick up. Well, let's just do that for this one. Why not? All right, let's look at see if the other English translations did anything different here. Okay. All right.
Verse 8.
We're on verse 8, right? Okay. In the future, there's laid up for me the crown. All right, that's New American Standard. Henceforth. So here's the noun actually, or the time element, henceforth, or from now on, there is laid up for me the crown. Okay, but they still included the there. Now, NIV, there is in store for me the crown. Okay, so, look at the Net Bible. Finally, the crown of righteousness is reserved for me. They put the crown as made it more clear that it's the subject.
Yes.
See that?
more accurate.
New King James. Finally, there again. ASV there. So let me see. There's also the literal.
Yeah.
The Young's, I have the literal translation. Henceforth, they put there is. Okay, so most of them, only the Net Bible in this case. Whoops. That's not what I wanted. Only the Net Bible in this case actually put it, I think, in the most literal way. The crown is reserved or laid up or in store for me. All right. So even this would have been a little hard to find because the other translations, have the same thing except for one. So
Yes.
and you would
Not depend on only one.
Yeah. And you may not
Majority is not
normally,
always right.
yeah, you may not normally use the Net Bible anyway, to look at. Usually we use the ESV, the NIV, the New King James, the New American Standard. But yeah, in this case, I'll use the Net Bible at times. But so, like I said, I didn't catch this when I first did the diagram. But now we know. And that's part of the process here, guys, is that when you do things together, like I highly recommend, having someone else sort of look at your diagram or talk about it with another guy, because what happens is you will each notice things that the other person didn't, or you might have done it a little differently because you looked at something or thought about something a little different, and so that's always helpful. Because then you can go, oh, I didn't think of that, or I didn't notice that. So yeah, now we can correct and make it more accurate. This is helpful because it's good to know what the subject is, right? That the crown is laid up for me, rather than there is laid up for me a crown. Now, at the end of the day, the meaning's about the same. But we want to work at being accurate, because sometimes that subtle difference can make a big difference in term doctrinally. In this case, not so much. It's going to give us the same idea, but that's not always the case. We want to make sure we're as precise as we can be, so that we can catch, like I've used that example in the past of in the Great Commission, right? Baptizing them in the name singular, right? Name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. And it's important to catch that name actually is singular. Jesus used the singular form, not the plural form, which technically it's an error grammatically. It should be plural. He's talking about whenever you have three, a list, more than one object there, it should be the names of the Father and the Son and the Spirit, because they're three separate persons, right?
Yeah.
Right? But he said name of. Why did he do that? Well, it is a grammatical error, but not a theological error. Right? Because technically, right, they are one.
Yeah.
They're one in essence, three in persons. He could have said the names of, and that wouldn't have been wrong theologically either. Because they are three separate persons, three distinct people. But they're also one in essence. So that's a real subtle thing to notice, but it's actually a significant theological statement that Jesus was making. So finding the details and being clear about the details can be a significant can make a difference, significant difference as far as theology that's involved in understanding the text. Jess, did you have a comment or question?
No, Dr. Tim.
Okay. I thought I heard you there for a minute. All right, so then let's get back to our diagram here, if I can find it. All right, so made some of those corrections. So let's do this. Let's identify. So I've got them separated here. Let's try to identify each phrase and clause and what it modifies, all right? So we've already talked about this first one, but you be sober, that's an independent clause. All right, the subject is you, and then the verb is be sober. All right, let's go to let's have Joshua here. Joshua, you can, I'd like you to just identify if this is a phrase or a clause, and then tell us how it's working here in the sentence, what it's modifying, okay? Are you there, Joshua?
Yes, Pastor Tim. Sorry, I'm driving.
No problem. So in all things, We're asking the question, is that a
clause.
phrase or clause?
I think that's a clause.
Well, what's in a clause? Remember, clause contains subject and a verb.
Okay.
So do we see a verb
Oh
here?
yeah.
Yeah. No verb.
No verb. So it's a phrase.
It's a phrase. And what is it modifying, you think?
Being sober.
Yeah, good. Modifies be sober. How? In what way?
Being sober in all things. In
Yes.
everything.
So is it telling us how to be sober, or the idea maybe where?
He's telling them. I think it's more of everything. How they respond.
Yeah, maybe how. How
Okay,
maybe,
sorry.
or where perhaps.
Yeah,
Okay.
how or where.
Yes.
Okay. And then endure hardship. Now we mentioned this before, but what is this, a phrase or a clause?
Wait.
Endure hardship.
The verb. I think it's a.
Just ask
I
yourself,
think
do we
it's
have,
a clause.
yeah, do we have a verb?
Yeah, I think the verb is endure.
Correct.
And hardship is the subject.
Well, that'd be the object. It's you, right? Because it's a command, so it's technically you endure.
Ah.
Okay, because it's a command in
Okay,
English,
yeah.
they don't put you. So we have a clause here, and then I think earlier we mentioned this looks like an independent clause, right? It can stand alone. It's just a command. It's part of the list here.
Yes.
Be sober, endure hardship. And then what about do the work, Joshua? What would you say there?
Yeah, I think it's still a independent clause.
Yeah, still an independent
Do the
clause.
work.
How about of an evangelist? Is that a phrase or clause?
Of an evangelist. Of the evangelist. I think that's a phrase.
Yeah, it's a phrase. There's no
I
verb or
think it's a
subject.
phrase because,
Yep. And
yeah,
what does it modify?
because I think it's
Oh, sorry.
modifying. I think it's modifying of the work. Doing
Yes,
the work.
the work. That's right. Modifies work. And it's telling us what kind, which work. All right, one more, Joshua, then I'll let you off the hook here. Fulfill your ministry.
Fulfill your ministry. Wait. I think fulfill your ministry. Fulfill your ministry. It's a clause.
Yes, because fulfill is a verb. And remember, you is the implied subject. Is this independent or dependent, you think?
Independent.
Yes. So we have a list here of independent clauses. All right, very good. Thanks, Joshua. All right, verse 6. Let me ask Charlie on this one. For I am already being poured out. Is that a phrase or a clause, Charlie?
Close.
Yes. Now, is it independent or dependent?
Dependent,
Yeah. How do you know that?
because it lacks phrase as a drink offering.
Conjunction of
Yeah, but there's a clue. Yeah, right at the beginning there. Of the clause. How does the clause begin? Did I lose you, Charlie? You still there?
Yes, Mr. Kim.
Sorry, yeah. So how
Next is
how does the clause begin?
Begins with conjunction.
I mean,
yeah.
what
It
begins it?
begins
Yeah,
with, conjunction. For
yeah. It's that word for. It's a conjunction. Okay, so that tells us it's a dependent clause. And then, so what do you think it's modifying? And for that, you just go. Sorry.
I think it modifies the four independent clauses.
The four command.
So sober.
yeah, in verse 5.
Yeah, I think
The
so.
four
Be
the
sober,
four verbs
endure, do,
do the work.
and fulfill.
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 Yeah, I think it modifies the
The four verbs. Four verbs.
telling. I think it's telling us why. Okay, because that word for usually gives a reason, right? A because.
Or because.
Yeah. Why be sober? Why endure hardship? Why do the work? Why fulfill your ministry? Because I am being poured out. That's the reason, the motivation. Questions on that?
And Mr. Kim.
Okay. All right. Charlie, what about as a drink offering? Is that a phrase or a
Phrase.
clause? It's a phrase. How do you think it's functioning here? What is it modifying?
It modifies being I am.
Yeah, am being poured out is the whole verb. Yeah, it's modifying the verb and being poured out. And how do you think it's modifying it?
It answers the question how
Yeah, very good.
how being poured out.
How am I being poured out? As a drink offering or like a drink offering. Excellent. Okay. How about this one? And the time, and remember, this is connected to has come, right? The time is the subject of the verb has come. And then we have that phrase stuck between it. So the time has come. What do you think? Is that a phrase or clause?
Independent
Start there.
clause. Oh, dependent clause.
And the time has
Clause.
come.
Clause.
It's a clause.
It is a clause. Now here's a question. Is it dependent or independent?
Time.
Dependent.
It's a
Still,
independent. Oh, sorry.
dependent.
Am I right?
Independent or dependent? I didn't hear.
Independent.
Okay. It actually is dependent here.
I think it's dependent.
How?
And let me show you how to see
It
that.
connects to reasons.
Yeah,
Yeah.
notice that that conjunction there, and, right?
And.
Remember, what did we say? It's what kind of conjunction is it?
And for.
Coordinating.
Connect.
It's coordinating. And what do we say coordinating conjunctions do?
Coordinating.
Equal thoughts
Coordinating.
or similar thoughts.
They join
Presenting
two grammatically
equal.
equal things.
Yes.
So the time has come is a clause. So it's going to be joined to another clause. And the one that makes the most sense is I'm being poured out, right?
Being poured out. Yes, that's right.
I am being poured out and the time has come. And I am being poured out was a dependent clause. So therefore, the time has come. Since it's being joined to that clause, it also will be dependent. Paul's giving us two dependent clauses here. He's joining them together with the word and. So we'd say dependent clause joined with for I am being poured out. Does that make sense?
Yes. Wow.
Okay. So this is why we spent all that time
Modifying verse 5.
talking about conjunctions. Because, and what the difference is, subordinating, coordinating. A subordinating conjunction usually introduces a dependent clause, like we saw here, for, I'm being poured out. A coordinating conjunction can connect anything. It's just equal. It can connect to words, to verbs, to nouns. It can connect to phrases. It can connect to independent clauses. It can connect to dependent clauses. It can connect anything. You just have to look and you ask yourself two questions. If you see a coordinating conjunction, the first question is, what is it being joined to? Well, in this case, it's being joined to this clause. I'm being poured out. Then the second question is, what then is it? The time has come then must be dependent clause because it's being joined to another dependent clause. And therefore, also, it will modify the same thing that other dependent clause modifies. This dependent clause, I am being poured out, modifies the verbs here. Therefore, the time has come also modifies the verbs. Therefore, it's the second reason Paul tells Timothy these commands. The first one is, I'm being poured out as a drink offering. The second reason is, the time has come. Any questions on that? You guys follow me?
Yes, yes, Pastor Tim.
Charlie, does that make sense?
Sir Tim,
Okay.
got it.
All right. Yeah, guys, if it doesn't, ask questions. All right. I want to make sure it's clear to you guys. And then of my departure is just a phrase that's modifies time, right? It's just telling which time or what
Uh,
kind of time. My departure's time, the time of my departure.
Has come.
Okay. And then has come is just this is the verb of the dependent clause or the verb for the subject time. So it's not modifying time, it's the part of the clause.
okay.
Okay. The time has come. That's the full clause. All right. So what we would do with these is let's see what would be the easiest show here. Here, I'll do it this way. So let's see what verse 5 would look like then, as far as the diagram. All right, let me do this. Okay, hopefully you guys can see. So I've got the diagram to the right over here. Notice
Okay.
then we have, I put but, a separate line, you be sober, right? We said that was an independent clause. So it's going to be all to the left. You guys see this? Let me blow it up a little more.
Yes.
Okay. In all things. So we said where, or that could be, or how. But it's modifying be sober, right? Then we have endure hardship. That's a second command. It's independent, so we put it to the left alongside you be sober, endure hardship. And then again, do the work of an evangelist. That's another independent clause. Of an evangelist modifies work. What kind of work? Fulfill your ministry. So there's 4 commands there. They're all independent. They're all of equal importance. Okay. They don't modify anything. Independent clauses don't modify because they're independent. They stand alone. Then we have verse 6, for, and that's telling us why. I'm being poured out. Okay, that's a clause, but it's dependent. So I put it under fulfill. But you could say, you know, why modifies all 4 verbs of verse 5. You could put that note in there if you wanted, just to tell yourself that. All right, so 4, I'm already being poured out. How? As a drink offering. So that's why I put it underneath here. And then, remember we said, so and here, and is connecting this clause with this clause. I'll put them both in green just to show it clear. All right. I'm being poured out. That's the first reason to fulfill your ministry, to be sober, to endure. And then the second reason is the time has come. Which time? Time of my departure. But okay. So that's where we have so far. So if I'm preaching this text, I'm going to probably combine all 4 commands into one point. Okay. You know, the exegetical idea would be something like Paul's final instruction to Timothy. And then it would have four instructions, right? And then I would have verse 6 is the reason for Paul's instruction. Okay.
Yes.
All right. Now, I'm just gonna, for the sake of time, go straight to the diagram here and talk about it, what I did, and try to explain to you why I did it. Okay. Notice we have here, oops. We have here, trying to get everything on this. Okay, look what I did. And this is just as I see it right now. We had these clauses here. I fought the good fight. I finished the course. I've kept the faith. Those are all clauses, okay, because the verb, there's a subject and a verb. And then the question is, are they dependent or independent? And I
Yes.
think independent was
Independent.
what we had said before, but then we want to think about this for a minute. Let's look at what we've got here. He's making these 3 statements sound like they go together, right? I have fought, I have finished, I have kept. This sounds like a list, right?
Yes.
So these 3, I think, clearly go together. The question is, are they an independent thought, or are they part of what Paul started with up here? I am being poured out, and the time my departure has come. So this is an exegetical decision. Is Paul now stating, so if they're independent, they would come over to the left, right? They'd be like this. Okay? They'd be 3 new thoughts or 3 independent thoughts. Or are they part of the reason that Paul is telling Timothy to be sober, endure, fulfill? Now, what I thought, and the way I dealt with that is I believed because Paul had this, I'm being poured out, I believe that these are just continuing his statement of why under this 4 conjunction. He's giving further reasons, I believe, in a list to Timothy of why he needs to fulfill these commands in verse 5. So I put them under, along with as a dependent clause in this case, even though they're not being introduced by a conjunction themselves. He didn't say, "For I have fought the good fight," because I think this "for" here is really introducing all of these clauses. And if he had put "and" here, and I fought the good fight, I think it would be clearer. But he didn't. He just put "I fought the good fight." So I think really what Paul's doing here is that these are several more reasons he's giving why Timothy should obey the commands that he gives in verse 5. Now, this is an interpretive option. Grammatically, it could be either thing could be correct. Grammatically, they could be independent or dependent. So this reminds us, guys, of remember when you're doing this, I mean, you have to make interpretive decisions. It's not just the grammar helps us. So learning all this stuff is going to help us. It gives us guidance. But sometimes you could have two options that both are grammatically acceptable. They're both grammatically allowed. So you have to decide what seems to make the most sense in this passage. All right. So in my opinion, as I examined this passage, I felt like it seemed like because Paul's making a list here, it seemed like he gives the commands and then he has all these statements after that in verse 6. I am being poured out. The time has come. I fought the good fight. I finished the course. I've kept the faith. The crown is laid up for me. I think he's just rattling off, or he's just stating these several statements, several comments or remarks that are only indicative that I believe are just part of this conjunction "for." Okay, so that's how I took it. You may or may not agree, but at least doesn't make sense what I did here. Are there any questions?
Yes, Pastor Tim.
Oops, it looks like we lost a couple guys. They didn't agree with me, so they left our meeting.
So, but Pastor Tim, if we this verse 7, if we put it is another statement or another independent clause, it can get the flow of thought, or what's the reason why he say these things? These three statements.
Yeah. Well, if we put it on a separate line now, if we say they're independent, then basically, this is how it would change how we interpret the passage. So let's say that, okay? Let's say, I think they're independent. All right, so we put them over here. Now, verses 7 and 8 now become a separate thought.
Yes.
Right? It's saying Paul's making a separate thought here. Now he's just telling Timothy his situation. Verse 5, he's given him a command. Verse 6, he's saying, I'm being poured out as a drink offering. Basically, my life is over. I'm nearing the end of my life, right?
Right.
I'm being poured out as a drink offering is a picture of sacrifice. I'm being sacrificed. I'm going to die. The time of my departure has come, right? That's what he's saying here. So I think, though, that's what he's saying here as well. I fought the fight, finished the course, kept the faith. He's saying I'm done. My job is finished now.
Oh, okay.
So I think it's the same idea that he's expressed in verse 6. He's just continuing in that thought, as opposed to having a new thought where he's just going to focus on what he's accomplished.
Yes. Okay.
So that's why I believe it makes more sense that actually this is all part of the same. This all goes together.
Yeah, interpretive, interpretive kind.
So, so I think verses 6 through 8 would be my second point of my sermon outline, right? The first point is verse 5, the commands, and then verses 6 to 8 is the reasons, motivation. Because there's implied here, motivation 1, Timothy, is I'm dying. But also 2, Timothy, I've completed the course and I'm going to be rewarded.
Yes. Okay.
So that's why I did it this way. I have, so, and you're going to find this is the case, now you may not see all of this at this point in the diagram, right? You may just say, okay, these are independent clauses. This is separate. All right. And you just keep going with the rest of the diagram. But then when you come back to this text and actually start working through it more and kind of seeing, you may find that, oh, wait a minute. These statements in verses 7 and 8 really seem to go with, they're saying the same thing he said in verse 6.
Yes.
So they seem to go together. Okay, now, so you may not see that until later. Or, like I said, you may have another opinion and be able to support that. I think there's stronger support with the idea that verse 7 and 8 go with verse 6.
Yes.
Rather than they form a new paragraph. So that's why I did it this way. There weren't any connector words. In fact, you don't see any between any of these, right? I have fought the good fight. There's no and. It's just I have finished the course. I've kept the faith. There's laid up for me. There's no and here connecting them directly. It's just there doesn't have to be an and. Sometimes, right? If for a list, you don't usually put and. It's just assumed they all are connected that way. So just because and is not there does not mean they don't go together. They still can. Just like up here. You be sober, endure, do the work, fulfill. There's no and between those things either. It's a list. And we understand they're in the form of a command. It makes sense. They all go together. They're 4 commands that Paul's giving Timothy to do. Okay, so this is how I would then diagram. And I would change, as we talked about here, instead of there's laid up for me the crown, it should be like this. The crown, and I would say there is not as good a translation, so I would just leave the word there, but I'm going to strike through it and just say from now on. From now on, the crown so this might be a little confusing because I'm trying to keep the word order here. But let me explain. So here we'd have the crown is laid up. All right. And I'm keeping the word order. That's why I did it this way. From now on tells us when. For me tells us why or the purpose. Okay. That's what I do with that. Questions? And then here,
No.
so which crown? The crown of righteousness. Which crown? The crown which the Lord, and then I put the righteous judge in the same line because it's same as Lord, will award. Where will he award it? To me. When will he award it? On that day. And not only to me, again, another where, but also to all who, goes with all, have loved his appearing. And there you go. All right. Any questions?
But Pastor Tim,
Yeah.
uh, it is, I mean, if I am going to divide this 6, 7, and 8 in different, in three different motivations, is that just fine? Like, for example, if verse 6, if I will consider it as Paul's motivation to Timothy by talking about the reality of the departure and death. 7 is like is giving his own example as one who fought a good fight, finished the race, and kept the faith. And 8 about the reward. Is it
Yeah.
just
Yeah, I think that would be a good way to divide it up. I put, Paul's commands in verse 5 and the motivation in verse 6. One motivation is Paul's ministry is over. Second motivation is Paul's example. The third motivation would be the reward.
Oh, okay.
I would break it up that way. So something like this. This is Paul's final commands. This would be an exegetical outline. And then Paul's motivation, Timothy. The commands are before, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, right? Be sober,
Endure hardship,
endure, do the work,
do work.
and
Fulfill.
fulfill, right?
Yes.
And then I think Paul's motivation, there'd be 3 of those as well. It would be the I'm dying, my example, the
The
reward,
reward. Okay.
right? Verse 6, verse 7, verse 8. That's sort of how I would see this. Here's the first, right? The first point, verse 5, and second point, verses 6 to 8, and broken up into 3. So that's how I would see it here. That makes sense? You guys, what do you, any thoughts about that? Or is that what you were saying, Charlie, or were you saying something different?
yes, Pastor Tim?
So, sermon be something more like not Paul's final commands to Timothy, but maybe, your duty as a pastor. And Paul's motivation might be, something like your motivation, fulfill your duty. I don't know. I need to think about how to make it sound better, but something like that. Okay. Well, I hope that was helpful. Looks like Jesse
Yes.
came back. Maybe he agrees with me now.
Pastor Tim, I was having trouble with my internet connection.
Okay.
Yeah, sure, Jesse. We think you just disagreed, so you left.
Because he's almost done. So he knows already that the text, that the whole chapter of 2 Timothy.
There you go.
Only Herman Bulo would do that. Because,
Yeah, where is he? He's
December
almost
pa lang
always
naman siya.
here.
Yeah, he
Yeah.
actually he read that one in our group chat. I thought he will join. Maybe there's no internet also.
Yeah. All right. Well, so I believe, Lord willing, I'm going to Los Angeles next week, but I think we should still be able to meet next
Okay.
week. But then after that, we'll be off for 3 weeks because I'll be in Pakistan. So, Lord willing, we can meet again the end of March, or actually, yeah, the last day of March. So next week, Lord willing, and then 3 weeks, we won't meet, but of course, you'll be working on your assignments, right? Get them done.
Yes.
And
Yes.
then, Lord willing, we can come back together again on March 31st.
Okay.
Okay. But again, Lord willing, we plan to meet next week at this time together. All right.
Right.
Thanks, guys. Let
Thank
me
you,
ask
Pastor
Narelle if you could